Good morning and welcome. Today is November 8th, 2018. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Logan County Commissioners to order. Please rise for the flag salute.
Yes, sir. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks again to all for coming. We'll move on to item 3. Any citizen desiring to be heard? Hearing none. We'll move on to item 4. Consideration and possible action pertaining to changes to conditions, fees, requirements, covenants, and fines of permanent and temporary road crossing permits. We have with us today our Assistant District Attorney, Lowell. If you'd like to give us your ideas on this, we'd appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, yeah, and you've already got the permits, the forms for them, and of course what the law allows you to do is grant these permits to lay lines in any public road right-of-way that you've got. And you can grant that, of course, to public utilities that operate within the state, and you can grant it to even private citizens that want to use the right-of-way. I think what's brought some of this to focus right now is when you grant it to a private citizen, which you have, the Attorney General says, plenary or complete authority to do, does that person who applies for that permit also have an obligation to get permission from the landowner? Because remember, you're operating with an easement where a landowner still owns the section line road right-of-way all the way to the center of the section line if they own the property. And they've got the right to use that for any purpose that doesn't interfere with its use as a public road. So because of that, the Attorney General's opinion from way back, 1982, and still recognized by the courts to this day, is that if there is an additional servitude, which means some use of the right-of-way being made that's not really a use to benefit the public, it's more a use to benefit a private person, usually the person who applies for the permit, then that person does need to get the consent of the abutting landowner and probably pay compensation, unless they just get a donation, pay compensation for the right to use that. So in the Attorney General opinion that we looked at, it's a saltwater disposal line in that case that prompted the question to be asked if a saltwater disposal line is laid to dispose of whatever's coming out of oil and gas wells down a right-of-way that the county maintains as a public road, does that permit applicant need to get the permission of the abutting landowner? And the answer is yes. So that, we haven't ever said, and I don't know any county that has, maybe till about this time, that one has to precede the other. And the Attorney General's opinion makes that clear in answering the question, does that permit applicant have to get the consent of the landowner before getting a county road crossing permit? And the Attorney General says, no, that's not required by law. It's not required by the statute. You have plenary authority. It's just that that person really does not have all they need to cross the property until they get the permission of the abutting landowner. So they need two consents. They need the consent of the county to use the road right-of-way, and they need the consent of the property owner to use it for the purpose for which they're using it. And you got to be able to distinguish that purpose, because you've got some public utilities, or you've got telephone and telegraph companies, cable companies now they would say, that are licensed by the Oklahoma Corporation Commission for the purpose of doing business in Oklahoma. They have the permission to use rights of way to lay lines, and they are not deemed to be creating an additional servitude. So they would not need the consent of the landowner because they operate for the benefit of the public. So there's a distinction to be made in there. Question always is this permit applicant going to create an additional servitude? which means an additional use not public in nature, then got to get the consent of the landowner. If not, then they just need a permit from you. And as you know, some of them don't even need that. You've got constitutionally created provisions that say the phone companies, the big phone companies, they can just use the right of way. As far as I know, ATT is not coming to you and getting permits because they don't have to. Yet they cause a lot of problems sometimes with their lines in
Especially
both
when they put them in
counties.
the middle of the road.
Right. And that's happening in both counties. But they don't come to you and say, well, you need a road crossing permit. You know, there's certain utilities that don't because they have a constitutional right to use the public rights of way. And that's yet a whole nother category. So they would not even need a county road crossing permit or the permission of the neighboring landowner because they've already got that created in the Oklahoma Constitution and the statutes that implement it. So what you would be looking at, if you want to even make that a condition that the property owner first consent to the laying of a line across their land, that's only the private citizen application that wants some sort of right to cross and use the road right of way to do it, to cross with some sort of line to get from one point to another. That could be an oil pipeline. It could also be a private sewer line. That's private. You know, if I just need to get sewer line to my property and it's not going to benefit anybody else and I want to use your road right of way, you could give me a permit, but I need to get the permission of the landowner as well because that's a private use.
So, Lowell, you mentioned earlier that the Attorney General's opinion said that a temporary crossing, like a saltwater line crossing, we as a Board of Commissioners don't have to have the permission sheet signed by the landowners in order to grant the road crossing permit. However, now I'm trying to figure out how do we ensure that the landowners have been notified, being representatives of all the people that live in our county. That's kind of one of our tasks, to make sure that they've been represented in that area. So how do we as a board legally say, well, can we approve it contingent upon them getting permission from the landowners? I mean, I'm looking for a way to modify this to where we do right by the people that live in our county as well.
So you could, because the state law that gives you that authority to give the permit for a private use, private citizen even, I mean, it's even clear, says on such regulations and conditions as the Board of County Commissioners may require, which means you can impose any condition you want. I know in the early conversations I had with Troy on this, what I wanted to make clear is that you do not have to impose that condition. So do not feel like if I didn't do that, I open the county to some sort of liability because we didn't get the landowner's consent and we issued a permit. That's not going to happen because of the way the statute's written. It does not require that you do that.
Okay, now I understand why you said it like that. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
But you could impose the condition. It's just you got to remember anytime you impose a condition, you got to follow your own condition. So if you say, yeah, we're going to require that consent beforehand, then you want to be sure you enforce that, because somebody could then come back and say, well, you didn't get the consent of the landowner, you gave the permit. So now you could be in more of a situation of having to explain actions if you do that.
On the public utilities like phone companies or Oklahoma Natural Gas or someone like that, they have the right to use the right of way, but do they have to follow our conditions? They have to be X amount of feet from the fence and so many feet
All
deep.
crossings.
The big ones, public utilities that operate, really do not have to. That's an area that there's a 2013 Attorney General's opinion that talks about that one. And of course, that one they were addressing phone lines. They would say they don't have to come to you. They're not subject to your rules, anything.
So they can just lay them wherever they want to then.
And that's what they're doing. As you know, AT&T's do.
It is, but there's a liability issue there for the county if we interrupt one of their lines. And for example, we just hit a gas line, a 8-inch plastic gas line that was in the middle of the road, and it was only buried about 3 inches deep. Now, we haven't been told by the gas company that they're going to come back and, ask the county to reimburse them for that. But there's all kinds of fiber optic lines and things like that are very expensive to repair. And when we get into those sorts of things where they're buried, within 6 inches of the road, and we've got a grader that comes by clearing ditches and hits a 100 pair fiber line, that's a big deal.
Sure. Yeah. And that is, and I don't know, because they don't have to come and get a permit usually if we're talking about phone companies laying fiber optic lines. So you're not even going to know where they are. You sure don't have the right, if they don't have to get a permit, then you can't impose the conditions. So what do you do in that case? Well, they have their own codes they're supposed to follow. Things like the National Electrical Code that will require a certain depth. And that's where I know in the cases where the insurance council we have defends those very types of actions, that's the points they raise, is whether or not you had to get a county permit, you still have national codes that you have to follow, you're expected to follow. And when the county is not digging, so they don't have to call Okie as we do when we dig in the road, you're just doing routine maintenance and you rupture a line, there's some issue there with they didn't bury it deep enough, because you wouldn't be rupturing it with routine road maintenance. And I know that's happened. I think in both counties. I know it has in Payne County.
It has here.
Yeah.
But like we have a ONG line going, service line, 3/4 inch line they're wanting to bore under the road. They were boring under the road without a permit, but it's a service line, so they can go any depth and they don't require a permit, is what you're saying.
That's, if you're talking about the gas company.
Gas company.
Yeah. They're a public utility subject to that constitutional provision. That's where they're going to come out and say, that's where we follow that. So we don't come to you. You don't get any permit request from ONG, I guess. OG&E probably.
OG&E.
You do get those.
Well, I asked for them, and we don't charge for them.
Sure.
Because they're a public utility. We
Right.
simply want to know who it is that's going under our road,
That's doing that.
and seeing if they'll go deep enough that if we replace that road or do anything to that road or it erodes, that we're not going to hit their line.
Right.
Yeah. Because it's expensive to get them to put another line deeper.
Sure.
And so it impacts our ability to maintain and, improve roads.
Sure.
So I request them to do that, but we don't charge them because it's a
They're a
public utility.
Right. Yeah.
But can I require them to go 6 foot deep as our permits have now?
And I think I would do it until such time as they tell you you don't have the authority to do it.
Gotcha.
Because it's still your roads. You're trying to maintain that right of way for
Right.
road purposes. And you
Right.
know to do that, you're gonna have to maintain it, grade it, and they need to be out of your way when you do that.
Right.
That's, yeah.
Right.
So on the temporaries, I'm taking it you're saying it's not our job to police if they have permission from the landowners. But we can make it a condition on our permits that you have to have their permission before you.
Yeah. In other words, you're gonna set an order of priorities there and say, don't come to us for the permit until you've gone to the landowner first. And you could do that. It's just you're gonna need to remember, we gotta enforce that. So some means of them proving to you they've got that landowner's consent.
Could we not just create another page to the permit that addresses when this is completed and signed by the landowner, it's attached into the permit, so then when it hits our area to start processing, we have that.
I think you could do it that way. And then you need to verify that is the landowner, but
Right.
that wouldn't be hard to do. And
In the case of saltwater lines and things like that, it could be several different landowners too, by the time it gets from start to finish.
Well, I think that we kind of need to have that attached to our permits because the average landowner is not going to know anything about the AG's opinion in 1982 and
Right.
So I think that we need to take that for one of our conditions is to be the place on that project.
Real good about that.
My opinion.
I had another quick question on that. It's associated, but driveways that come out onto the easement.
Right.
Is that a private driveway on the easement or is that a public driveway on the easement? In other words, do we, is that not go to the homeowner to maintain
The driveway would, yes.
drive,
Right,
including the tin horn?
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
because
how I had
that's-
it figured.
Yeah, that's their private connection to your public right of way.
Would
yeah.
we be able to permit that just so that we know the proper one's going in?
And I don't know if you would that way.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they talk about
Okay.
pipelines, lines and things like that. They didn't talk about
Right,
anything on the
but-
surface.
But, yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I don't know. One thing we should point out, because Commissioner Gibbon, you mentioned it, there may be several landowners and you're thinking because the line
Right.
may cross over different tracts. What about the situation where you have several owners owning one tract of land?
Yeah.
For instance, Aunt so-and-so died years ago and
Yeah.
left all these heirs.
Right.
Who
right.
gives the
Oh, that never
consent?
happens. So-
Yeah. Who do you get the consent from?
Oh,
in that
boy.
case?
And that's one of the things these pipeline companies are gonna have to address.
Yeah,
They're gonna have to find the
the owner in charge. Of course,
owner in charge.
the
Yeah.
place I would probably direct them to start is who's getting the tax bill each year.
There you go.
That's somebody's being responsible for keeping the taxes paid, so that
Right.
would probably be a good indicator.
Right.
But,
The thing of it is, most of the oil and gas companies have done the research and created their own bank of library of land records that they pretty much already got down who owns what because of doing their leasing.
sure.
So now let's talk about fees. I think the law says that we can only charge actual cost.
Well, that's the Attorney General's opinion, is it needs to be commensurate with what it takes to process that, to inspect that. In other words, you don't want to use what I would call blue sky, just a big old number, and you can't really justify that that's the cost it took for you to go process the papers, pass it through to get approval here, then go follow up with inspections and that kind of thing.
So I guess my question would be to the board is, do y'all feel that we're accurate on what we're charging? Are we charging too much, not enough?
I had a Tillman County commissioner tell me they were charging $1,000 per permit. And then I think Kingfisher County's charging like $2,500 or some such thing. And I just kind of have an issue with how do they justify that? They go, hey, we just do it.
The AG's opinion actually uses the words revenue generation. The fees are not to be used as a revenue generator.
Right. Yeah.
So what's our current fees? $200, $300?
They're $300 per crossing. And the way that we've handled that with the temporaries is we give them the mile. If their section changes, which changes the legal description, that's a new permit and a new $300. And then the way that we disperse the $300 is $200 of that goes to the district that the line lays in, and $100 of it goes to the general fund. And the reason for that was taking very literally the AG's opinion that said it's to reimburse the cost of the processing and general fund between Sarah and the commissioner's office and us mailing them out and all of that. So that was being very true and literal to the AG's opinion of the fee disbursement.
Well, honestly, I think a charge of $500 wouldn't be out of line with like $200 going to the general fund and maybe $3 to, or vice versa. It doesn't matter to me. But there is a lot of time and effort involved in these temporary crossings where the district has to go out and take time to go out and look at that. You've got hourly employees that are involved in that. Commissioner salaries aren't free, although you've done. But still, there's a little bit of, I don't think that would be out of line. I think probably $5,000 would be out of line, but I think probably $500 wouldn't be something that,
Yeah. Well, I just don't want to overcharge by all means.
yeah, I agree with that.
And you do remember that we do have the added on to our crossings, permit crossings anyway, that if they're a dirt gravel road, they have to gravel almost a quarter mile.
200 yards each direction of
Right.
the crossing. And I assure you, they damage way more than
I
what
agree.
they fix back.
I agree.
I guess that's another deal is I got a project out on Midwest Boulevard. It's kind of getting off this, but we permitted a permanent line. So they have to come back and gravel 200 yards each direction of the pipe and what's it. But they do so much damage on roads just getting to the project. Is there any way that we can hold them liable just for driving down the county road?
And they have the right to do that, as long as they're not operating with an overweight truck or something like that. They've got the right to use the public right of way. And it's gonna put wear and tear on it. So I don't know a way to do that other than to somehow fit that into the permit application process, you know, because to
Right.
get to that point, yes, they did have to cross to get there. And their interest in coming is to go to wherever they've got their permit and their line. So there may be a way to cut it in that.
When you and I had talked previously about this, even overweight trucks, like we had like Manhattan Construction out on one of the roads we just paved a couple of years ago. We believe that their overweight trucks, when they put in a pipeline, destroyed part of our paved road. And when you and I discussed that, you were in agreement that we could recover costs, but we had to prove that they're the ones that actually
That
did it.
Because you've got the statute on damage to the roads,
Right.
including the pavement.
But how would you do that? I mean,
You'd have to see them and know they contributed
Oh,
to
right.
that problem. It's-
right.
It really would come down to, you gotta catch them in the act, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just because they drive it with overweight trucks, you know,
Would-
I mean, I've got an oil facility there that there's no way they can get in and out of that sucker without going across asphalt.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's causing problems. I even put 16-ton weight limits and reported with the public safety, and they're still using it, but I can't catch them doing it or whatever.
sure.
And so, I mean, just the fact they have that facility there tells me they got overloaded trucks going on that road, but
Yeah,
how do you prove that the damage was actually caused by those trucks, see?
yeah.
So, Lowell, to continue that line of thought, we have a couple of Oklahoma Highway Patrolmen that live in our part of the county that are in the weights and measures division, and that's what they do, is they ticket trucks for oversized loads and that sort of thing. If we could get that information, if we had the ability to see that information and tell that one particular company over time was ticketed on a stretch of road for running overweight trucks, would that be an indicator that we would be able to sue for or to petition them for reimbursement of damage to that road?
You could, if you've got that kind of evidence, that's what you're looking for.
Right.
Is I can point to that company saying they caused it. The thing you couldn't get is the usual wear and tear of just driving down the road, occasionally with a truck. But if it's constant and you can show that, I think you could build at least some case to say you need to pay us for the damage you're doing to our road.
Right.
Because you've got it's all in the proof is where that's going to be the issue.
Right, and then I guess the Corporation Commission issues overweight permits for.
Or actually Department of Public Safety. I think
Okay,
does
public
it.
safety
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
Issuing overweight permits to drive on county roads, I mean, they're still gonna cause problems for our county roads. Is there, The county, as far as I know, doesn't get a whole lot of benefit from overweight permits being issued. We don't get monetarily reimbursed for that I know of. Is there
correct.
anything there? I mean,
Should we
Yeah.
not get some of that permitting for overweight?
And it's interesting because it used to be you could issue a permit, and then the legislature, and we think it's because of a very strong lobby, just yanked that away in a bill that said you can't issue permits anymore. I mean, that's what it says in the law.
right.
And says you can't limit the restrictions that the state puts on as far as weight limitations unless you can show climatic conditions are causing
You and I
this.
talked about that.
Yeah, or deterioration as a result. And we stretched that as far as we could with another Attorney General's opinion that said the deterioration doesn't have to be connected with a climatic condition. You know, you can actually say if it's deteriorating, then you're justified in placing a limit on it. But then all you're going to get, if there's a violation, is the fine paid to the court. So you're still going to realize that money back.
Yeah.
That's they'll pay a fine, but
Not
where does
to
that
us.
money go? Yeah, it goes back to the court unless, as a part of that case somehow, the prosecution would say you need to pay restitution for what you've done. But my guess is they're not going to do that unless, again, you got substantial damage, because they're going to say, well, a reasonable amount of wear and tear is going to be expected here. But the fine is going to cover usually what they do. I don't know of cases where they say go back and make restitution to whoever maintains the road. They just say the fine is what you're going to pay for what you did, and then you don't really see that as a county.
And we have a situation right there at 33 and 35 wherein that underpass isn't high enough for some of these trucks. And so apparently ODOT is giving them permission. They say check with the county commissioner, but they don't have a clue who the commissioner is. And so instead of that, right there at the New Loves, they'll go on Midwest over to College and then back down. But they don't have permitting for doing that. They're oversized. They're the whole 9 yards. We just don't have any recourse on that. Is that correct? If they come up the road, that's when we find out.
If they don't have a permit, though, then they're in violation, right?
Well, they have a permit on the highway,
On the highway, okay.
but not in the county.
Not
But they
beyond
get
that.
off the permitted route.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because of the
And that's
underpass.
where you've got the problem with the legislature that took away that ability. It was
There you go.
there, and I remember the days when permits were actually being granted and conditionally, just like you do road crossing, and then they just came along and said, you're not doing that anymore.
There you
And just one very
There you
quick
go.
action, yeah.
SOL.
Yeah, and Payne County still tried to do that using the Attorney General's opinion and got
Right.
sued by DeLisi Brothers
Oh.
in an action that went to court and was compromised on the basis that, well, we do have some authority to impose limits and we're going to do that, and we worked that out, and that's what was done. They recently went back and had a whole pavement management study done to justify imposing limits on roads that are deteriorating, and Payne County's gone ahead and imposed those limits. So we'll see what happens, because that could be challenged again.
Wow.
And that was the case that you and I discussed, the DeLisi, when we were talking about that one lease road going to a disposal well that
Yeah,
was being torn up.
yeah,
And we decided that we could put signs up that says you can't drive on it when it's wet. But
yeah.
yeah,
But then, and then if we know they're damaging it, I still say we can use that statute to say we can come after you for the cost to repair it. If we know they're actually, I mean, there's sometimes when they cut into the road, things like that, that's the kind of thing you can certainly get damages on. The weight limit is a little bit more hard because of the legislation and the way they took away the ability to regulate that, other than what the state does. So it's like the state will have the authority to determine that issue, whether or not it's your road or not. It's, yeah. We didn't like it because when we had the permits, we had a little more authority.
Just fix it on limited amounts of money, just fix it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Troy, I know you're itching to say it.
Well, I'm back to the road crossing permits.
Sure.
And rather than attaching a form that would list the property owners and such, Lowell, how would you think, just to kind of ease off on the county side, but yet still have something, that we drafted an affidavit where the company applying attests that they have obtained all the required permissions of all landowners and are attesting and certifying to that, and we have them actually acknowledged and make it an official affidavit attached in. Does that accomplish kind of what the commissioners are wanting without putting us in the position of having to verify that whose name they listed is a property owner? That really throws that back onto them.
It does, and that's actually, as I was coming into the building today, I was thinking that very thought, is can you shift the responsibility over to, I got the permission, and the person that applies, I have obtained the permission, rather than showing proof of I've obtained the permission.
Well, if a landowner came back and had an issue, I feel like that would cover it, right?
Yeah.
Then that throws them liable because they lied.
That's a document that the landowner can use to say you falsified this document in order to get this
Exactly,
In order to
without
get
putting
that.
the pressure on us over the verification of the
Right.
names.
Yeah, and it also would provide notice to that permittee, you've got to get that permission. I'm not sure how many of them even know that. They think if I go to the county and get the road cross permit, I got all I
I
need.
think a bunch of them don't.
Yeah, and if they don't know it, that would be one way to say, as a condition, you've got to sign this affidavit saying you've talked to the landowner, you've gotten their permission.
You know, keep us from having a stack
It-
for each permit.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a stack, I mean, but it would be another page just in two different forms.
Just one page.
I would suggest to the board, we left the agenda item as such so we could address pretty much everything that's in these permits, and I know over time there's been discussions of changing this and changing that. I would suggest maybe we pick which ones, start with permanent, the temporary, kind of run through each item in there, because this is general enough that we can do the total revamp now rather than multiple times if the board wants to do
Right,
that.
and I agree, and at this time, I'd certainly be willing to entertain a motion to require an attestation by the applicant for temporary road crossings that they have received permission from the landowners for that type of action.
Chairman, before you move on, I have a question.
And then we can also entertain motions for increasing the fees and also changing anything else to the forms that we want to do. But go ahead, ma'am.
And well, that actually is my question. Do you want each change to be a separate motion, or do you just want to decide and make one motion that will cover all the changes?
Well, it matters not to me as long as they're all articulated and recorded and we all know what we're voting on.
Okay.
And if it's an all or none thing, then, you know,
I'm just
asking.
asking.
If there's one out of 3 items that we're voting on that the board can't agree on, then we'll reduce that down to 2 or whatever.
Okay.
We'll go forward with that.
I like the affidavit page for the,
And it would be
That's a
on
good
both,
idea.
each type of permit.
yeah, but, you know, I mean, on the permanent, you know, that's gonna be on private land anyway, they're just crossing the road.
Yeah, but the fee simple, or the fee title to the center line is on the property owner. They would still need it even just without using the bar ditch area, they still need it to cross the road. More so with the permanent because it's a permanent placement in that property owner's land, where the temporaries are just that.
But it still would be going off easement into the property owner's land.
So it'd be an attestation for both
Oh,
the
either
permanent and the temporary. That's what we're saying.
I'm okay with both. I just wanna make, on the fees, I just wanted to make sure we can justify, you know, raising it, which I think you could, I mean, you could.
Yes.
Inflation.
I think that we're probably under, if you really looked at the hours involved from start to finish in this process.
I know Sarah spends a lot of time on road crossing permits. I think she's wanting to get up and give a speech about it.
So if you're gonna adjust the permit fee, I would also ask that you designate the division.
How much to general fund, how much to
Yes.
district?
I'd say $20 for general government.
Yeah. We love money.
General government ain't out there fixing the road, are they?
Best I tell the game. I'd say we leave it the same, a third. I mean, just how we've been doing it.
200 and.
If you're raising it to 500, I say 2 and 3.
Sounds good.
Is there any other things that we need to address in these permits while we're here?
Let's, if we can, stay on the permanent ones and go through and look at those. I know there's a change on the temporary that we're gonna have to, which was really just an error that needs corrected.
So, is there something where we can require a public utility? And Lowell, you mentioned that they're required to use some federal guidelines or even state or federal guidelines for how deep they're going to bury something. Is there a way that we can require them to furnish us with the standards that they will use when they put in a permanent road crossing or permanent installation?
Oh, like that
in our right of
3/4
way?
line.
Yeah, and it would only be if they have to come to you to begin with, because remember, some of them don't even have to come and get a permit. So there's not a way you could really require them to come, just because they don't have to. They meet the public utility requirements anyway that don't require it.
It's gonna
That's
take
the problem.
legislation.
Catch
Yeah.
22 stuff. I love this
Yeah.
thing.
It amazes me that they can come out and just plow down a new gravel road if they want to and don't have to ask you, don't have to fix it.
Yeah,
What happens, a lot of phone lines in, I mean, they just plow right through our culverts. And now we got a phone line,
Yeah.
or the culvert
I've
ripped
had
open.
that.
and-
Couldn't prove it.
yeah,
Been too many years.
yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
All right.
Well, maybe that's out of the question.
that.
Again, if they're not going to use our standard, our requirements for depth and that kind of stuff, and do we have our requirements for depth and
On the permanent,
minimum? Okay, I'm looking at the permit. It says minimum 6 feet below lowest. Right. Okay. So we do. So if they're going to use something different than that, can we? If they're applying with this permanent crossing, they're applying with this, and they want to use something different, then we can require them to provide us with what that is. And it would have to be at least deeper than what we're requiring. It wouldn't be.
Right. Yeah, these are your standard conditions, and then if you wanted to deviate from those, remember you can impose any conditions on any particular permit request. So you could have additional conditions. You may not have a place on this form for that, but you can certainly, if you wanted to add additional conditions to a particular permit, I think you could do that. These are just your standard ones, so these are going to apply to everybody that comes along.
there's a couple of places it points out that a change can be made approved by the county commissioner on the 6 feet below the lowest portion of the road, quote, unless approved by the county commissioner of the district. The next paragraph talks about several on electric lines and such, but there's another in there that says the Board of County Commissioners in its discretion may vary these requirements for small lines, but in no case shall any variance be less than the original permit, and that was under the electrical. We also have fines worked into both permits. $2,500 for the different issues.
So who gets the fines?
That would be something that would need to be addressed.
Yeah, these are civil fines, so these come to the county. They're not.
County General,
Yeah, they're not,
Sheriff fees.
yeah.
So would that be the contractor or the heir apparent?
Who pays the fine, you mean? Or
Yes.
And it's whoever.
Yeah, whoever committed
Whoever
the
holds that permit, they have said, I will do
Okay.
this and not incur a fine. Yeah.
So, just back to the fees, let's say that we find a company for crossing the road wrong or something. The fees go to the general government, then could they be transferred to the road district or?
Well, part of the fees, only part, as I understand, go to general government, right?
and you know, he's talking about
Yeah.
fines.
Oh,
If we
fine,
imposed a
fine.
$2,500 fine, who does it go to?
Yeah, and there's not anything that really regulates in the Attorney General's opinion who gets that. So you could do however you
Back
want
to
to
the
do it.
district.
Back to
Yeah,
the road district.
yeah. You're gonna be using that probably to make repairs if they don't do it, you know, so, yeah.
As long as we can legally get it back to the M&O of the district. So,
Yeah.
So with, seeing how that's not spelled out in any of our internal processes as of this time, is that something we want to clarify as a board today?
I think we should.
Okay,
So any fine collections will remit, well,
to the district.
again, you're back, I think you would tie together the fact that the permit, the AG's opinion that says it goes to cover the actual cost. So in light of the way that the permit fees are handled and recognizing that there's two different funds that have an actual cost, the same would hold true in collection of a fine.
I think that's an assumption.
Well, I'm asking.
So what justifies a proper amount of a fine? Because that AG's opinion talks about fees, right, not
Right.
fines.
It does talk about fines,
Does
and
it?
I don't have a copy of that with me. It's a 2012 AG opinion, but says, yes, you have the authority to impose fines. It'll also say, and kind of here's the standard for it. You have your fees, that's kind of, you're not a revenue generator. It probably is going to say the same thing. When you think of fines, it's not really to be considered a revenue generator, but it's a punishment for violating your conditions,
Yeah.
for sure. So, but I would need to look, I didn't bring a copy of it. That's the only place it would be that 2012 AG opinion.
Well, I can't see where we would be required to keep a fine that's designed to punish a company for not following the rules down to a low enough point to where it only covers our expenses, because at that point there's no real punishment there. That's just a cost of doing business, and they just start running over us after that.
That wasn't
Right.
my question.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand, but we're trying to figure out, what constitutes
These are set
a
at
proper fine.
$2,500. The fines included in the current permits include a $2,500 fine for opening a ditch or a trench without obtaining permission, $2,500 for installing the line before getting the permit.
So can that punitive, is that fine, is that the maximum that we feel that the fines can be allowed by the statute? We haven't.
The statute doesn't have a
It
number.
doesn't have a number. It just says that's in your implied authority to impose regulations and conditions. That includes the ability to impose a fine for violating your regulations or conditions. That's what the Attorney General at least has come out and said that's proper to do that.
Well, I mean, so a fine of $100,000 would be deemed unreasonable, I would assume.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
think so.
it has to be a reasonable amount.
Number,
And I guess that's kind of what we're searching for, is what's the top end of what would be considered reasonable at that
Reasonable.
point?
Yeah, and of course what you're doing there is trying to get the attention of, we mean what we say with our regulations. If you violate them,
Absolutely.
you gotta pay for
Right.
having violated them, which is what a fine is all about. It's intended to punish, whereas a fee is intended to cover the cost to do what needs to be done. So I'm going to try to get that opinion up on my iPhone and see.
On the temporary road crossings, sometimes we allow them to put in a culvert pipe to be able to get underneath the road so they don't have a hump in the road. But I think we ought to have a minimum of 25 tons of gravel they gotta put back on top of the spot where they install it. Because a lot of times what's happening over is they'll go out and put in a new culvert, then they take a backhoe bucket full of gravel and spread on top of it, so there's the gravel.
Right.
I think we need to have a minimum of how many tons.
Yeah, that's approximately a truck, one
A
truck.
semi-load.
Yeah, one truckload.
So in the other requirement, and I don't know, I'm asking how it would tie, because we currently state in the permanence, boring of unpaid roads, a minimum of 4 inches of 1.5 inch crust rock or traffic bound surface course shall be laid 200 yards each direction from the center of the pipeline crossing, no gypsum to be used.
That's permanent. I went back to temporary.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, would that, the 4 inches at the 200 yards,
That's more than one truckload.
okay,
That's much more than one truckload.
That's about a quarter of a mile.
Yeah.
okay. So we want to make it different,
And that's
but
about,
isn't
that's
the
about 10
cut,
trucks, isn't it? Something like that. At 4 inches,
Quite a few truckloads.
yeah.
I just think we ought to have a minimum what we're gonna allow on the temporary when they go out.
I guess my question is, isn't the cut? Whether they cut the road to lay the line permanently, they're still cutting it to lay a temporary culvert that comes back up, would it not
Equate.
equate to the same cut?
Yeah, the expense of a temporary crossing versus a permanent one.
But even on the permanent, if they bored or cut it, they still gotta gravel that,
All right.
so.
So I think what Monty's talking about is making sure that they put enough gravel on a cut on a temporary.
Well, so am I, because the other one is more.
Yeah. Well, right now, we don't have anything, is what he's saying, for a temporary. We don't require anything right now, other than it'd be covered back up, right?
Right.
So you're saying like replace the pipe and then they put their temporary through it and then the gravel on top of that. So they're already paying for a pipe. But okay, all right. I hear you, I hear you.
Don't matter to me.
I just want to make sure I had it right. Okay.
And
So this would be a load of gravel on top of that.
a lot of times they'll come back and pull that pipe back out.
Wow.
So I just think there needs to be a minimum. I mean, and Troy's got a pretty good point on it. But maybe 4 inches, 200 yards each direction might be excessive on a temporary or permanent.
Well, I'm just, in my mind, a cut's a cut.
Well, a permanent, I kind of see that and support it, but,
Right.
I don't think one time we've ever had one put that much rock on the road. Not
Yeah.
once.
We've had them come ask to not put that much down.
Yeah, yes. And they got really ticked off when they had to. And they sure did do a good job.
so,
So Monty, what specifically, if you don't want to use the same language in the permanence that allows for the 4 inches at 200 yards each direction for, on the temporary permit, what specifically do you want on the temporary?
I don't know, I just threw it up there for conversation. I'm okay with using the same language.
I mean, they're cutting the road either way.
I'm good with it.
what, 200 each way on the temporary if they cut the road?
I guess they won't cut the road much anymore.
Okay. That's a,
Well, what they're going to want to come back and do is use a temporary bridge and
That's
they
right.
just go across the top of it.
And we have specifically banned them in the permit. No structure such as items known as water bridges or temporary bridges shall be used on the county right-of-way or road unless approved by the county commissioner for the district. Use without obtaining permission will result in a fine of $2,500 per occurrence.
But the $2,500 would be a lot cheaper than 4 inches of gravel, 200 yards each direction of the cut.
Yeah.
Well, that still wouldn't turn them loose from putting the gravel on just because they got fined, would it?
So
They were-
Would they still be responsible for putting that down even though they were fined?
So upon inspection, and that's, I think, the key, is if they put one of those speed bumps out there, and that's what we're talking about, right? And we saw it before it went into operation, we could shut them down and fine them for doing that. And then they still gotta come back and do it properly.
You know what happens is them temporary road crossing deals they got, these little cars go across and pull their mufflers off.
Right. And then they file against the county.
I think the
But
county
that's
would
it.
have the right to withhold any further permits until they complied. The fine is punishment for not complying. If they get fined, that's separate and aside from complying with the permit. They still have to come back and comply.
Right.
So whatever you guys want to do on that.
Well, I think we ought to raise the fines at that. I mean, if
Double it.
I don't think that's out of line.
Then what if they still don't comply?
Then they can't do business.
They just can't do business.
That we don't approve any more of their stuff, and
Yeah.
we just keep fining them until we own all their trucks.
Okay, so before we change the fines, Monty, I'm not clear what we're doing about the gravel requirement on cuts on the temporary.
I think what he was saying is we make it the same as on the permit.
Okay, okay.
Is that right?
Like a permanent process.
When are they required to do it?
I'd say at the time of the cut.
So then when they come pull their line up, you've got a ditch again.
No, because they go through a pipe.
And they just pull the hose out of the pipe.
We got quite a few that don't go through a pipe.
But what happens on these, they say, hey, we'll put in a culvert. Well, they'll put a culvert in where you don't even need a culvert, just so they can get to the other side of the road. Oh.
Okay. So we'll add on the temporary boring of unpaved roads. I would suggest maybe putting a / installation of any culvert type material. Does that work? Boring and or installation of any culvert pipe conduit.
Works for me.
Okay. A minimum of 4 inches of 1.5 inch crushed rock or TBSC shall be laid 200 yards each direction from the center of the pipeline crossing. No gypsum to be removed to be used.
Can we go ahead and make it asphalt 4 inches thick?
For the entire mile?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now on to the fines.
So you want me to read from this AG opinion?
Sure.
Here's what it says on that. Legislature has given counties broad statutory powers to establish rules, regulations, and conditions for laying of pipes and conduits on county highways. As a part of this regulatory regimen, counties may charge a penalty for non-compliance with rules established by Board of County Commissioners relating to the issuance of road crossing permits. As with the charging of fees, the imposition of fines must be related to the purpose for which the fine is imposed, may not be arbitrary or unreasonable. Whether any particular penalty violates this principle is dependent on a specific factual situation and cannot be answered in an Attorney General's opinion. Then it goes on and says it's up to the district attorney in enforcing the law about excessive fines to determine whether or not a crime has been committed. So that's what this goes on to. There is a section where it gives its actual opinion. The Board of County Commissioners regulatory authority to adopt rules, regulations, and conditions includes the power to assess a fine for noncompliance with rules regarding road crossing permits issued pursuant to section 1401. Then it goes on to the fee statute and says, this statute, which prohibits the charging of unauthorized fees by public officers, is applicable to county commissioners who knowingly charge a fee or levy a fine not authorized by law. A fee or fine in excess of the amount reasonably required for administration and regulation would be unlawful. It's within the discretion of the district attorney to determine whether to file charges pursuant to a violation of this statute. That's real interesting. 'Cause,
So,
yeah, I mean,
so is
you're
our
our client,
representative
so-
of the district attorney's office, sir, would $5,000 seem unreasonable to you?
I don't know that it would. You know, again, you're trying to exact compliance, and they do talk in there about you're trying to compel obedience to the regulations. It's a regulatory purpose. So, and I like to always say, if you hear, it's not always good to follow what other counties do, because you've got one that you're looking at $2,500 fee for a, that's kind of high. So that's high for a fee, but fine, you are trying to get into a situation where it's not just, I can remember the city of Stillwater had their parking fines so low, you had people saying, that's just a fee to park. So I get a ticket and I pay a fine, that's just a fee. So they upped them, and that stopped. Because why? They're regulating the conduct that way to say, don't set a fine so low that, oh yeah, we can afford it. We'll just pay that as a fee for doing business. It's a fine, it's not a fee at that point. So,
But they're making a profit.
yeah, yeah. So that's where you're wanting to say, you're not supposed to have a fine here because you're supposed to follow the regulations and conditions. That's why you got the permit. So there needs to be some teeth in it. That's what the fine is. To say if you're going to violate it, you're going to pay something for a violation that is a meaningful amount that gets your attention. So it's hard. That's why the Attorney General wouldn't say, I'm going to tell you what it is.
Okay, so the fact,
Yeah.
the fact that we were very explicit in this permit with the fines, we laid out, and I'm asking this so that we can establish that we're not arbitrary.
Right.
In the fact that we specify if you ditch or trench without obtaining permission, it's a fine of $25. Currently, that's what it says.
Right.
We address a fine for laying a line without obtaining a permit specifically. We address failure to clean up and or repair county right-of-way will result in a fine of $2,500. We broke them down to attaching the fine amount to this action. Does that actually make us very compliant to that non-arbitrary type
Yeah,
requirement?
and it also gives the specific factual situation, which they're saying that's how you measure that by. You know, is in a specific factual situation, is that fine commensurate with what they did? You're giving them notice, they're signing a permit saying, I understand, except for those that don't get a permit. I guess they're not reading this. That's what they're supposed to. So, I mean, they should pay a fine because that's why we have the permit. You don't just go into a county right away with that permission. So, but the other ones that are in here, you're giving them notice. You know, this is what you're to do, and if not, then you need to be prepared to pay a fine for not doing it.
And these fines laid out in that manner, then they can be stacked. In other words, for each different type of occurrence incurs the fine for that occurrence.
Yeah, I think you could because you've got separate things
So,
going on.
if we had a company that didn't apply and go by the rules, who actually issues the fine?
And it would be really probably the county commissioner that would say, here's a bill for the fine.
So you just write up an invoice and
That's how I would start. I think I gave Troy, I sent you the deal that said start with that, or maybe one of you start with that. Secondly, go to demand letter from district attorney, then bring a civil cause of action against them to collect. So, in that order, you're billing them basically, just like you would for a fee. I mean, you're sending them a bill.
I can create a standard fine form that we can all use,
Yeah.
or you all can use. Okay, so the dollar amount of fines then, or any additional fines that aren't already laid out.
So I think what we talked about was raising the fine per occurrence to double what it is now.
Had a question,
Can
Lynn?
we give them an option? Like paying our district a certain amount of money instead of putting the rock down so we could do it?
We can't private contract, and that would create that position.
Yeah, not a business.
If it makes sense, we can't do it.
Could they,
Yeah.
they couldn't even make a
Pretty more
donation.
practical, logical, forget it.
I don't think so.
Legislators in control.
We tried that once.
So the challenge you get into is then you have to follow up, becomes an auditable item. Because if we take a donation for a requirement for them to do that, and we take on that responsibility, then we absolutely have to go do that. And we have to use that money to buy the materials, and we have to go do that, and we have to document it, and it gets into kind of a mess.
So I was figuring out a while ago, each one of them road crossings would cost them about $12,000 for rocks.
For a temporary line.
Mhm. I would say
But I think you all have to determine have you hit the level of excess with that requirement?
I think that 4 inches, 200 yard each direction is gonna be,
They're gonna squeal like a pig.
And some already have.
It did.
that's extreme.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, it was your idea.
Yeah.
Is that good
I
idea?
first think it ought to be about 5,280 feet each direction.
There you go. That's 4 inch asphalt, I know.
Well, and I
Including
know,
the
I've had conversations, and each of you all have had conversations that have relayed that many, while they have no problem laying some gravel down, they see the point of it, that this may have reached excessive.
Well, it doesn't seem like that to us.
Well, what if you was out there laying that water line though?
I hear you.
So,
And they might do 10 a mile. Maybe not 10, but
Mm-hmm.
you think 100 yards each direction on the temporary?
I'm thinking what they'll do is run all their lines in the same area and cover them all up at one time.
take a big old tent on.
Well, here's the thing I think you have to look at is purpose of this is not to rock your road, it's to repair the damage that they did.
No, I think you're looking at it wrong. This is rock the road.
Well, I'd like to look at it that way, but
If the road's not rocked, then how can you see?
I mean, on that temporary deal, because they cross so many times, I mean, 200 yards, you know, like Louis said, about 12 grand per deal.
yeah, but it would only apply if they actually cut and installed, right? Bore under
But-
it.
But
Well,
if they're
yeah,
going down
bore
that
under
road, they're
wood,
going to.
yeah.
Them water companies, they don't bore.
Well, they're not allowed to cut by the permit.
Mhm.
Well, they gotta get from A to B though. That's the problem.
You know, permit requires a bore, not a cut. So that's kind of where
Is that on a permanent or temporary?
both.
I think it's a little scream on that temporary. I really do.
I agree.
Well, it's not required on temporary yet.
The temporary actually says, in construction of pipelines, utility routes that cross county roads or roads, no ditch or trench shall be opened by the applicant, petitioner, contractor. All crossings shall be bored unless approved by the county commissioner of the district. Opening of a ditch or trench without obtaining permission will result in a fine amount of $2,500 per occurrence.
Right, but the fine, we've already discussed, it would double.
Right.
But right now, we don't have a requirement for them to rock any portion of that road.
And that's why I said
And that's what
earlier, was
you were
about
talking about.
23, 25 tons of gravel
Okay.
for every time they,
Then I thought you changed it to.
well then,
Blurb.
Troy had a pretty good point where you make the other companies go 4 inches thick, 200 yards each direction. So I think we need to be pretty fair on both of them.
Well, on a temporary, yeah, so on a temporary one, what do you think? And the same distance would be excessive is what I think I've heard you say.
Yeah, I think it's a little too much. I'd say no less than 2 semi-loads. I mean,
So I'm gonna say
Yeah, but
50
that's
tons.
fluctuating. I think you're gonna have to have something a little tighter than that.
well, we'll put 50 tons, no less than 50 tons of gravel.
Spread evenly between the
Yeah.
center line of the cut, you know.
Each side cut, one load per
Because I'm
side.
telling you right now, they just go after the backhoe bucket full and
That's it.
Okay, so how about we look at this, that they shall apply a minimum of 50 tons, 1.5 inch, or TBSC. But I think, so what space do you want that 50 tons, or they're just gonna open the tail and drive a mile down the road?
Can you distribute it on
2
both sides?
semi-loads. Louis, what are you thinking? Caliber 4 inches thick, hell, 100 foot, so each 50 foot each.
Yeah, I'll take 100 foot each direction.
50 feet each direction
I could
from the
go
center
Maybe
of,
that might ask my calculator here, my materials
Not to
calculator.
exceed 50 tons?
the minimum of 50 tons.
Minimum.
Sand and gravel.
That'll work.
So.
Not to exceed 50 tons, they'll be out there with 3 pebbles.
What we're gonna say, they're average 20 feet wide, 22 feet wide?
Probably 20
I think I
average.
called 20 a while ago, just
20,
around it off.
okay. Length.
That's good.
Depth 4 inches. Come on.
That'll work perfect, 100 feet, that's 46 tons. That's a 23 tons of load, which is what most of them carry.
There you go.
Yeah, 20 feet. Yeah, so this is what I come up with on gravel. 20 feet wide, 100 feet long, 4 inches is 33 tons.
You figure in density,
This is a real simple program for a real simple
He's
person.
got density and all on his.
It just says gravel on mine.
well, actually, I'm wrong, that's 46 for 100 feet, so if you went both ways.
We're
And I
talking
think they're
about- we're
saying
talking about
50 feet each
foot
way.
each direction.
Okay,
Each
that'd be-
from
that'd be
center.
46 ton, two loads.
Okay, so they shall apply a minimum of 50 tons of 1.5 inch or TBSC, 50 foot each direction from center of bore or cut.
50 tons would be 3 trucks, because they'll only carry, most of them carry only 22.
They're gonna cheat you out
tons.
4 or 5 tons, so
Yeah, okay.
you're not gonna go out
Hey,
that way.
they do overloads all the time, so big deal.
Okay.
Make them feel good till they cheated you out
There
4.
you go. Thank you. Talk it over with highway patrolman maybe.
You want to stay on the temporaries with the lay flat, no leak only, no aluminum?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
But I'm only one voice.
Do you want to
have
consider,
more crossings than the rest of us, so I mean, you
Yeah.
kind of get a weighted vote here, but.
Okay, then all
I agree with
fees and go to district.
Nah, ain't quite.
Unless they occur in District 2, which is,
Fees still go to district 3.
yeah.
so on the
Yeah, that's
temporaries,
profit making.
we also have a requirement that they are to maintain, include mowing and removal of vegetation from openings of tin horns being used by the owner petitioner while the temporary lines are located in the county right of way. We have no fine attached to that specific requirement. Do we want to include a fine there?
Sure.
We have to have a means of enforcement.
Okay. The one correction that we have, and that is we have a
What's
date,
all of it?
a timing issue, and that is on the very front of the temporary line, we are granting a temporary permit for a period of 90 days. But further back in the permit, it says 45 days. Which one do we want?
45 is plenty.
Okay.
What do you say?
Yeah.
What do you say?
What'd you say? I didn't hear it.
45 days long enough on a permit?
Yeah, pretty much whatever you say on that.
On a temporary?
Then they have to re-permit if they want to.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You fine with me, whatever you say.
Okay.
There's one other fine that we need to probably address on the temporaries. It says the name, address, phone number of petition owner of the line should be clearly posted at each line location across any egress point to include all roadways, driveways, outhouses.
Yeah, so
In which line intersection failure to properly label line is, as required, will result in the fine being assessed in the amount of $250 for each location not properly labeled. So, $250 fine for not labeling the line, each line. So,
But you know,
If it's not labeled, that'll be a lot of fines because they go through several intersections. I mean,
That's right.
I mean,
one line
it'll add
would
up
be
in a
several
hurry.
fines.
They don't.
I just saw that
Right,
one was
yeah.
different than the others. And
Right. Yeah, I
one's
mean,
a-
each driveway, I mean, 250,
I mean,
adds up in a hurry.
Yeah,
if they
okay.
removed or secured or whatever thing like that, the rest of the lines wouldn't be affected, so
And that's very cheap for them to do because most of them just print off stickers and put on pipe.
that's it.
All right. What else, gentlemen?
That's all I got on this.
Okay, so who's gonna make the motion?
Well, let me make sure we have.
Motion's up.
All the pockets.
Okay, so
Yes.
this is what I have followed along with. That we will create and add to both temporary and permanent an affidavit to be completed by the contractor, company owner, whomever's applying for the permit, that they will attest that they have received the permission of the landowners to which hold the title to the property that will be used either temporarily or permanently. That we're gonna raise the fee for both permits from $300 to $500, and it will be remitted $300 to the district, $200 to county general. Any fine collected will remit to the district of occurrence in full, if I understood. The temporary permit will be amended that the contractor owner shall be required to apply a minimum of 50 tons of 1.5" or TBSC rock, 50 foot each direction from the center of a bore, cut, or conduit to include installation of temporary tin horn. Fines for all occurrences except for the labeling of the lines on the temporary permit will be raised to $5,000. The label requirement for each egress point on the temporary line will remain $250 per occurrence. That on the temporary permit, the requirement that the company keep the vegetation cleared from the right-of-way and the tin horn openings, we will add the $5,000 fine for failing to do so. And the temporary permits will be valid for a period of 45 days. And then after 45 days as such, they shall have to redo. Before you move on, I just thought of something that we might have a contradiction. On the temporaries, we have, I thought we had addressed the removal of the lines.
Yeah, it's like the third paragraph in the end. It says not later than 45 days after the permit's approved.
Okay, so the reason I bring that up is it's a 45-day permit. Do we want to address that they've got to have time to pick it up before there's a fine, or? Well, after a period of 14 days past the stated 45 days, the line remaining in the county will be considered abandoned and will be removed by Logan County. Owner petitioner is required to notify the county commissioner's office on the first business day following removal of the temporary line.
There's no benefit to the county for removing the line.
Well, that's why I'm wondering, do we want to add, I mean, if the county has to go out and pick it up, the county is incurring a cost to dispose and pick it up. So do we want to address that?
That would be part of the fine, would it not?
Well, the fine, there's not a fine in there. I mean, there's $50 each day that the line remains after.
And then after a period of 14 days, it says the county will remove it. So 45 times 50 is what the fine would be, right?
Okay.
Once you get to that point. So that's a decent sum.
Well, Marvin, that's incorrect. Because the 45 is referring to the day of the length of the
Okay,
permit.
that'd be 14, excuse me.
So it's 14 days.
Yes. So,
But I think you've got two different issues there, really.
Well,
You're gonna fine them for leaving it behind, but now you gotta go send out somebody to pick it up and
okay.
dispose of it.
So at the end of the 14 days, they would owe the county $700, right? Which isn't really a fine. I mean, if they wanna just, but they are leaving materials behind that probably cost a little more than that. But in any case, I still think a fine is appropriate if we have to go out and pick it up.
So the 50-day covers the cost if you pick it up after 14 days.
Ma'am?
I just wanna make sure I'm understanding that the $50 per day after 14 days, if you actually have to go out and pick it up, that $700 is appropriate to.
I don't think it covers the cost of my
Okay,
diesel to go out there and
that's
do it.
what I'm, okay.
How you pick it up?
That's it. I
Right.
mean, because a lot of times, you know,
Pretty cute.
they'll run them pipes through them culverts. Instead of trying to pull it back out of there, they'll just chop it off on both sides and leave it there.
Wow.
A lot of times.
Which
Nine times
gums
out of
up the
10.
culvert and makes water run over the road and cause
Well,
damage.
And
Well,
it
we're
depends on
out
what
there.
they were pumping through there, it could also contaminate the surrounding right of way.
I think there's two different fine things here. I think if they run over past the permit at $50 a day, additional permitting fee, essentially. But, and we'll buy that, we'll give them 2 weeks give time on an additional extended permit at $50 per day. But if they go off and leave it past that, then it's gonna be,
That would include that pipe they'd leave in a culvert.
I think then we hit them with the $5,000 fine again.
Per day.
There you
well,
go.
no, because we're going out to pick it up.
Now you
so-
sound like DQ.
That's $10,000 a day at DEQ.
Me and DQ got something in common.
There you go.
Okay, so if we go in and we add that
Yep.
after the period of 14 days past the stated 45 days and line remaining in the county right of way will be considered abandoned and removed by the county, owner will be assessed fine of $5,000 for county, for abandoning the line. Is that what we want?
Sarah, can you think of anything else? I mean, you do a lot of permitting.
Yeah, a fee for every time they give me attitude. When they bring in incomplete.
Only gonna get
permits,
worse.
right?
We need a fine for attitude, I guess.
Yeah.
Listen, this county would have no financial issues whatsoever if we could create
There
a
you
fine
go.
for attitudes.
God, just what the sheriff would have to pay us would be crazy.
I didn't know that.
A lot of donuts. Missy's had to add on.
So do you want me to reread what would be included in the motion, or did y'all follow?
Ma'am, please do.
Okay.
Please summarize one more time.
Okay, so the changes that will take effect, both temporary and permanent, will be the addition of an affidavit that will be required stating that the company owner contractor has obtained the permission of the landowner and all landowners abutting the distance of their line. It will be notarized and sworn that landowner permission has been obtained. The fees for the permits will be raised to $500 with a $200 to general fund, $300 to highway district, for which the line is permitted. Any fines collected will remit to the district of the occurrence in full. The temporary line will have, the temporary permit will add a line that includes the contractor / owner shall apply a minimum of 50 tons, 1.5 or TBSC, 50 foot each direction from the center on any bore, cut, or conduit temporarily installed. All fines mentioned will increase to $5,000 per occurrence, with the exception of the fine for failing to label a temporary line at each ingress egress. It will remain $250 per occurrence that it's not properly marked. There will be a fine of $5,000 added to the temporary permit in the requirement that the vegetation be kept cleared from the right-of-way and the tin horn openings. The duration of the temporary permits will be 45 days. And in the event that the 45 days is, the lines are not removed and new permits not filed after 45 days, there will be the $50 per day for up to 14 days imposed for that extended permit fee. After 14 days, the line will be considered abandoned. The county will remove, and a fine will be assessed in the amount of $5,000 for the abandonment of the lines. Did I miss anything?
I don't think you got the attitude thing in there.
Lowell, can you, do you think that this is proper and right and we're good with what we're doing?
Yeah, that first one you have on the attestation, I would recommend on a form to be provided by the county. We will generate the form they will sign.
Right, it'll be added to, yeah.
Yeah, and then, because on that, I would want to have a place where if they're not imposing an additional servitude, that would be at the very bottom. They would sign under oath, this is not imposing an additional servitude. I am not required to get the consent.
And you're going to help me write this?
I can write the whole thing, yeah. Then the other thing, I don't notice in the temporary, it's real clear, you know, that it's got to be removed after 45 days. I almost want the temporary to have language that says this temporary permit will expire 45 days after it is approved. The idea of using the word expired, because everybody understands if I got an expired driver's license, that means something. This says, here's what's to happen if, you know, you're supposed to remove it. But you're also operating under an expired permit at that point. So
Okay.
if you're saying I could come back in and reapply for a new one, that's what I'm doing. So then I don't have to remove it if I get to you in time to get a new one.
So on this line on the
Yeah.
front of the permit, I
Yeah.
gave you a copy.
Yeah,
Shall we change that line to be all temporary, well, that's, okay. How
I would
about-
keep your language there, any temporary line located, and you can
Okay.
change that to 45, but maybe right above it say this permit expires 45 days after it is issued. And then the next line, any temporary line located shall be removed.
Okay,
I'm just throwing in the word expired just because we can then say you've got an expired permit. And that would jog them. If they want to keep their line, they could come back to you and say, I'm going to apply for a new temporary permit. Each one has its own term then. 45 days from date of approval, it's expired, and you're expected to remove your line unless you've gotten a new permit. So,
Let me a lot of times, all these companies, they'll fill out all these permits and bring them in, and you know, say, well, we got one on the agenda for our next business meeting, and they'll say, well, we got to have water to this rig by, you know, Tuesday of this week. Can we go ahead and get a verbal? How can we address that? I mean,
yeah, and that's where they don't apply in time. They want to start
Right.
operations before they get their permit.
I mean, if we said yes, but it's going to,
Contingent.
I mean, What if it didn't approve through the meeting? I mean.
That's when the 45 days
Yeah.
would begin, or
Yeah, that's what you
would
got.
be when you gave your verbal?
It would if you're gonna allow that, and you would have to say that start time could be approved in the discretion of the county commissioner, but the problem with that is then why bring it before the board then?
We just take all verbals out of the,
Yeah,
especially with the addition of the affidavit for the property owner. I think that really kind of
That
changes
does.
the whole idea of the verbal, because now we're gonna require they prove that they have the landowner's permission
Yeah,
before
that's it.
you, so I think that kind of,
Truncate that.
They just better get their act together.
Well, you can't tell me they don't know months ahead of time.
Yes,
They
they
just
do.
drag
Yeah.
their feet.
I mean, it's like any license or any permit, you know you're gonna need it. You don't wait till the last minute to start applying.
Right.
This is the same thing. You know, they know their project, they've got
It's
it.
like
mapped.
forgetting to call Oki before you start ditching the ditch, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you'll never see anybody that's got as many excuses as what these water
Yeah.
companies have.
we can change the language. Most of these guys are downloading from the website, the forms and such. So the breakdown of that, I can go in and change and make a very plain, all bold, no verbal permissions will be issued effective immediately.
That'd be good. All right.
So, I'll entertain a motion.
Too big. Wasn't mine. I'm just.
You're
There's
getting the
three
most
of us.
impact is what I'm saying.
I'll move that we approve.
Well, I will second.
Okay, have a motion and a second as read by our very competent county clerk.
Can-
Yes, ma'am.
I just thought of one other thing that we might want to notate, and I think we need to notate an effective date. We have permits that are in flux right now with a meeting that doesn't happen and that kind of thing. So I think we need to allow, one, for me to get these worked up and new ones printed and online, and two, to cover for those that are already in process.
So you're talking about an effective date of implementation of this
30
change.
days or?
I'll say November 1.
November 1?
We have the 15th meeting, and I know we've got permits that are already turned in, and I think we probably already have some that are in the process of being written up to be here for the 30th. I would suggest December 1. Lowell, do you have?
Yeah, well, and here's the other question. You're gonna rework some language. Do you wanna see the language before you actually put it into effect, to be sure? I mean, that, we're talked about it, again,
Right.
verbally, but it's gonna be on paper.
I think as
You
far
want that to
as due
come through a
diligence
meeting?
is concerned, yes, sir, I believe we should.
You could say that comes through just a regular meeting for approval as to form, and then at that point, you would say, and this becomes effective this date.
So if we do the as to form approval on the 30th, unless we think we can get it all done in time for the 15th, which,
That would, the affidavit form is what I would work on.
yeah.
Yeah, that-
Yeah, exactly, so, what do y'all, remember Monday's a holiday, we're kinda, I have to post the agenda on Tuesday.
Just as quick as we can get it, I mean, but give yourself plenty of.
So 1 December.
Well, how about if November 30th, we review and approve the changes to be effective December 1, does that work?
I'm good.
Now, the only thing with that is, can we, because you're still gonna have permitting coming in this period of time. So when, do we want,
They just gonna have to wait till December 1. I mean, you gotta get them off sometime.
So,
You can't just
hang on.
drag it
So
out.
if we approve a change on the 30th of November, and they want to,
be on the
As-
agenda the 30th?
be on the agenda for the first working day in December with a road crossing permit, how did they get all of that done,
Or even the 30th.
you know?
Or the 30th? I mean,
Yeah.
the ones we
Not
approve on the
approved.
30th would be,
How are they gonna do it by the 15th of December?
Very quickly.
You
No, I
gotta-
mean,
you gotta draw a line somewhere.
If we don't
Yeah.
approve it until the 30th, I mean, it's a brand new requirement on the 30th. It wouldn't go on our website with the new forms until that day, you know, at best. And now, anything after that date, you know, would need to use the new forms, I guess is what we're saying, right?
But legally, I mean, they gotta have landowner's permission today.
Right,
Yes.
but we're not enforcing that today. That's
Yeah,
not
but we're
something
not
that
talking just that,
we're
we're
not the
talking
police.
fines
Yeah,
and,
we're not required
fees
to
and-
enforce it, but we can enforce it, is what I understood, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
you can make a condition what you're doing.
Right.
Alright.
Yeah.
okay, so today, because I'm gonna be gone tomorrow. Logan, can you have the affidavit back here?
I don't think it'd take long to do.
Okay, so I'll get my changes on, we'll readdress this on the 15th. If we can get it knocked out, because I'll just work this weekend.
You're a slave driver, Mom, that's all I'm gonna say.
December 15th be the cutoff date.
Well, no, let's do it this way. Let me have these in for your review.
No.
On the
because, boy,
15th.
If you gotta work on the holiday, I'll never hear them.
I work a lot of holidays that you don't even know about, so hush. We'll put it on for the 15th. Then if there's any further changes, they have to be addressed on the 30th, we'll know. A target effective December the 1st.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Not on this subject, no.
No. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes without objection.
Lowell, thank you for
You're
having
welcome.
that
Thank you
help
very
us
much,
through
sir.
this.
Do appreciate that. A lot of clarity.
But don't run off, though. I do got a question.
Okay. All right.
All right. Moving on to item 5, any citizen desiring to be heard. Hearing none. Item 6, comments, announcements, questions by the Board of County Commissioners. Mike, you got anything?
Not really.
In mind?
I do.
Shoot, sir.
The county question we had on the ballot for 522 EMS, it passed hands down. But what's our next step on that? Can you kind of guide me through that?
That would be the appointment of a board of not less than 5 people. So you want to think about who you want on that board. It should be representatives of the area. And at least 5, you could have more than 5, but at least 5 I think is what the constitutional provision calls for. And then once they're appointed, they're going to go to work adopting their bylaws and that kind of thing that they need to function. But you're going to pick who they are. So that's-
Lowell, if this was done by school district, as you know, you helped us draft that language.
Right.
So we would really want to have one from each one of those school districts and then end up with an odd number on the board.
You could do that. It
Right.
would certainly be a fair way to do it because you've got then each one of them represented.
So if there was an even number of school districts, we need to have
One more maybe.
one more.
Which there is. There's 6 districts.
Right, that's why I brought it up. It was
Yeah,
So maybe one at large.
you could
But I
do
can
that.
see
Yeah.
there being
so
a
we would
problem.
need to have 7.
Yeah.
Problem with the Wellston School District that comes into the county. I mean, we only have a few residents that are even in that school district. So are they gonna have a representative on EMS? I guess they would.
They would, yeah, they would. I mean, I would think that every school district would need to be represented on the board in
Right.
some fashion.
Right.
But again, we could look at, there's a couple different ways we could do this. The largest school district could have 2, or we could just appoint one at large, or, you know, to get to the 7. I mean, I don't think we would want to try to exclude a small school district. I think that would be problematic.
It's a large school district. It's just you only got one real street.
A small portion in Logan County in that school district, right? That's what
Exactly.
you're
2 or
saying.
3 residents.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this. Will there be anyone in that district to serve on the board?
That's the question.
Well, that's it.
That's what you got.
See,
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think I could.
Yeah.
I mean, I might be
You may
able to
have
get
trouble
somebody,
finding-
but I don't know that I can.
So if
Perkins as well.
if we offer, I mean, and I think that's I would believe we'd want to at least offer a seat to the people in that school district. However, if we couldn't find someone to fill that,
It'd just be vacant.
well,
Or you're not actually creating, I mean, you're picking your representatives the way you want to do it. That's not written in stone anywhere.
right. So if
That
we,
it
if
has
we
to be
had no
commissioned.
one apply from the Wellston School District, then we could accept another applicant that was qualified to fill that seat as well, no matter what district they were from.
Right.
Okay. I think that's
All
where I
right.
was going.
Yeah.
So
But-
seven, I think seven is what we would
Right.
want to do.
But I think to be fair, we need to try to get one out of every district.
I agree, I agree.
Than one at large.
I agree 100%.
But again, they're not gonna have any money until
Yeah.
after
They need-
next year.
They just need to start meeting and thinking
They
Is-
through.
Put their
When they do get the
bylaws
money, what are they
and all
gonna
that.
do with it? They're gonna contract with somebody to provide ambulance service, so,
So
they
they
can-
can spend that.
yeah, they can begin thinking about that part of it.
Is there a time frame on the county to getting a board in place? Is my first question.
There's not a set time, it just, the voter approval happens, then the district is created basically from that, and then the board is appointed.
And this board should do by resolution to determine how the board appointments will be made and any of those parameters by a
You
resolution.
could do that, yes.
And then that way forever in the future, we
Yeah.
have how that
Then you're gonna
district.
set it, that's where you set it in stone, because you create the
Okay.
resolution.
But on that resolution, we need to be careful because we can't get no one out of that small district.
Well, you may have that struggle with any of the districts that are not overly populated.
Yeah.
Well, we
That's
can put that caveat in the resolution.
Exactly.
Yeah, you could say.
I would, something along the lines of accept the applications for a period of 60 days, and if no one files, accept them from the next nearest school district. So maybe you would have a closer,
Or as determined by the Board of County Commissioners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does this board need to do some kind of legal to notify the county assessor to start assessing us? Putting that on the.
And actually, the constitutional provision and the vote should trigger that in action already. So they could raise money and not yet even have a board.
Right.
Start collecting.
but the timing doesn't allow for this year because the millages. So
Right.
actually, the
Yeah, right.
assessor
Too
will
late.
get it with the tax levy sheet that is going to be compiled and filed for the next year. She gets that from me.
Yeah.
And they'll be added on to the levy sheet. This year's complete.
It's
Is
too
that
too far down.
Fiscal year?
Calendar year for
Calendar
the,
year. So 1 January, they'll start collecting funds.
Not
No.
gonna start collecting until November next year, but they're
No.
gonna
Right.
assess, they'll have the property in the district assessed, they'll know they're gonna add 3 mills to
right.
the assessed
But it won't be
valuation.
on till the 2019 tax bill.
Yeah,
Right.
So
That's-
collections will not begin until November, December of 19.
That will finish up.
yeah.
As long
So
as
they
we don't
won't
see them
see
do
it.
anything to notify
Yeah.
them, so.
They won't see any money in the coffers until then.
Okay. And even then, they're gonna see very little, but.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's all I had.
All right, I will entertain a motion on item 7.
Make a
All-
motion.
Second his motion.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.